Good morning, Morai Rabotai. We're continuing on Masechet Berachot, and we're holding on Daf Lamed Dalet Amud Aleph, 3 lines up from the bottom of the Amud. The Limud of Amud Yomi for Chodesh Cheshvan has been sponsored by Shahab and Shenaz Rabbi for the health and prosperity of their family and the Hatzlacha and growth in Torah. Sponsored also by Hami family, Eilu Nishmat Yosef ben Alegla Simcha Bad Rachel, and Aliza Talyasar Bat Chanoch Feivel, that the Neshamot should have an aliyah, and for general Hatzlacha of the family. Amen. The Gemara continues, Tanu Rabbanan. Now we're going to discuss the institutions of Chazal, of bowing down in different brachot of Shemona Esrei. Of course, we all know that we bow several times in Shemona Esrei. Where are those places? Can you bow more wherever you want in Shemona Esrei? And so on is the discussion of today's Amud right now. Elu brachot she'adam shoheh bahen. These are the brachot that you bow be'avot tchila v'sof, in Birkat Avot, in the beginning and at the end. In other words, you have it by Hashem sfatay tiftach v'gitiratecha baruch ata Hashem, right? Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak, Yaakov. That's beginning of Birkat Avot. Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak, Yaakov. And then the second one is by Magen Avraham, the end of Birkat Avot, right? So that's the beginning of the tefillah. We're going to come back to the importance of this bracha in just a moment in the Gemara. But nevertheless, the Gemara says, and in Birkat Hoda'ah, Techila Vasof, you do in the beginning of Modim, which is Techilat Birkat Hoda'ah. It's not really a bracha, but it's the start of the bracha, Modim Anachnu Lach. And then you have by Hatov Shimcha Ulchana Lehodot, which is also thank to you is fit and befitting to thank. So that's the end of Birkat Hoda'ah. So you have by the beginning of Shemona Esrei and the end of that first bracha, Magen Avraham, you have by Modi, which is beginning of the Birkat Hoda'ah, starting to think, right? We learned yesterday that the structure of tefillah is such that you praise, and then you ask, and then you thank. So by the praising and by the thanking, you bow to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In the middle, you're standing like a Avid, asking for whatever it is that you and mainly the community needs. If you pay attention, all of them are plural form. We're asking not for personal selfish things, but we're asking for the community. So those, you're standing straight. But in the beginning of praising HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Birkat Avot, and in the beginning of thanking HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the 3 last brachot, that's where we bow to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And says the Gemara, if you come to bow, and lashuach, to bow, by the way, comes from the source root of shach. Shach called basa. Shach means to be lowered. So it's not just physically to bow. That's really a manifestation that we are lowering ourselves in front of HaKadosh Baruch. The concept of bowing, and we're going to have it just in a moment, of 3 different ways of bowing down. Each one of them is one madrega higher than the other one, and the higher the madrega is, the lower the person. So the lower you make yourself, the greater hishtachava'ah, the greater bowing it is. You're humbling yourself in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So that's really the concept. The concept is when you praise Hashem, you want to manifest that the praise is coming from the fact that we realize where we are and where HaKadosh Baruch Hu is. Like Mr. Hashem says, you come in front of Hashem, you literally talk to Him. He has allowed us to talk to Him directly. And that is a very humbling fact. So we start Shemona Esrei by humbling ourselves. Like even the wording is, Hashem sfatay tiftach v'gitiratecha. Hashem, open my mouth. I can't, I'm speechless standing in front of you. Help me talk in front of you, right? Such a beautiful, humbling word it is when we start the Shemona Esrei. And again, we manifest that by bowing down. So hence the structure of bowing in the beginning of praise, bowing in the beginning of thanks, having all of the brachot of asking for our needs sandwiched in the middle. So it says Gemara, how about if you want to do more, right? If you want to bow in the beginning and end of every single bracha, do more, right? Right? More is better, no? Says the Gemara. If you want to bow in end of every bracha and bracha, or in the beginning of every bracha and bracha, we teach him that you don't do it. The Gemara doesn't say it's asur. But we teach him not to do it. Why do you teach him not to do it? What's the problem? What's the problem not to do it? Because the Farashim explain is going to be, let's imagine if everyone does whatever they want to do, so then the institution of Chazal gets lost in the middle over here. And people think that you have to bow by every one of them, or people think it's optional. Wherever you want, you bow, and then they're going to come not to bow where they have to bow. You lose the institution of Chazal. And therefore, better to just keep in with what Chazal have instituted, the 4 times that we bow at the beginning and end of the first bracha, beginning of and end of Birkat Modim and Zehu. Now says, by the way, there's another aspect that I'm going to discuss, that the Ben Ish Chai writes this in Torah Lishma about somebody that wants to be mahmir more, right? We all think that being mahmir, gewaldig, right? It's great. The more mahmir you are, the better it is. That's what we think. The Ben Ish Chai says absolutely not. In order to keep a humrah, you have to be holding in that direction at least, even if you're not in that place exactly. But it has to be, the Ramchal in Mesilat Yesharim calls this mishkal hachasidut. You want to become a hasid, you have to have a very exact scale of weighing everything to know what to do and what not to do. It's a balancing act, and it's a delicate balance, like many things in life, which we're going to discuss just in a moment. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Shimon ben Pazi, Amar Rav Yishua ben Levi, Mishum bar kapara. Hediot kemo she'amarnu. A regular guy, the halacha is kemo she'amarnu, like we just said. That you bow in the beginning of Avot, at the end of Avot, in the beginning of Hoda'ah, at the end of Hoda'ah, Shalom al Yisrael. Have a nice day. Kohen Gadol. A Kohen Gadol, besof kol bracha ubracha. He bows at the end of every single bracha in Shemona Esrei. Right? What does this say? Well, why does the Kohen Gadol have to do more? Says Rashi, take a look at the top Rashi and the Amud. Kohen Gadol besof kol bracha, kol ma shehu gadol beyoter, sarich lahachnia ulashpil asmo. The greater you are, the more you have to bow, bend yourself and lower yourself and be more humble. The greater the person, the more humble he has to be. Like Chazal tell us, Hashem told about Avraham Avinu, the more I gave him Gedulah, the more I made him greater, the more humble he made himself. And that's how it works. It's like a seesaw, right? The greater you are in the eyes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the lower you are in the eyes of yourself. And that's not a lack of self-confidence. Moshe Rabbeinu was pretty confident, right? The midah of Moshe Rabbeinu was what? Yikov hadin et hahar. He was an unwavering, uncompromising personality, unlike his brother Aaron HaKohen, that was compromising, and his compromise actually got him into trouble by compromising for Egel HaZahav, and almost Hashem killing him and his children, and resulting in the death of 2 of his children out of 4. But Moshe Rabbeinu was unwavering, uncompromising, but at the same time he was the greatest anav. So those 2 are not necessarily a contradiction. It doesn't mean that you're a pushover, but it means that you realize that you are a projection of the kavod of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Everything you have is from Hashem. So you don't take credit for what you have. So Kohen Gadol is the greatest Kohen, is the representative of the Kahal in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, bringing the most important korbanot, going to Kodesh HaKodashim, and so on. So he has to be really humble, and therefore he bows in at the end of every single bracha and bracha. V'hamelech, and the king, who is the greatest level of leadership, HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given leadership. We spoke about this before. In the eyes of Umot HaOlam, Melech is the top, is Mashpia. gives shefa to everyone else. He's the giver. In Yiddishkeit, the Sfirah of Malchut is the lowest Sfirah. Is mekabel from everyone to indicate, and then he gives to the next Sfirah, right? But he is the greatest mekabel to realize that he is just a conduit. He is just a pipe. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, through him is mashpia. He is just a puppet, basically. And the more you realize that, like David HaMelech was the greatest king because he says, I'm not even a human being. I'm like a worm without any power of myself, right? So the greater king you become. So a king that's in that thing, he has to be the most humble. That's why he has to carry a Sefer Torah to humble himself, an extra Sefer Torah, a second mitzvah. Every person has a mitzvah of writing, so one Sefer Torah, he has another Sefer Torah that he has to carry with himself, aside from the one that he keeps at home, in order to become the carrier of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's words. Symbolically speaking, he's the carrier, he's the conduit, he's the pipe of the Torah to the community. So the king, says the Gemara, kol bracha u'bracha v'sof kol bracha u'bracha. He does the beginning of every bracha and at the end of every bracha. Whereas the Kohen Gadol does only at the end of every bracha, he does in the beginning of every bracha and at the end of every bracha.
Are we do the same now at the beginning of the same bracha that had
your food? Yeah. They do for sure the basics. Like Maran Chida writes a fascinating thing in Moreh Be'etzba. Moreh Be'etzba is a tremendous sefer. I said this once before in Amud Yomi that every Yid has to buy and read Moreh Be'etzba cover to cover. Actually, he was the Turkish Gadol Ador, the grandfather of Rabbi Chaim Palaji was Rabbi Yosef Hazan, a massive Tamei Chacham, a tremendous, unprecedented Gadol Ador and a Lamdan. He wrote the Sfarim of Chikrei Lev, and he tried to write. Also, he was a prolific writer. Rabbi Chaim Palaji himself was a prolific. And he said, "I'm not jealous of the Chida in the big Sfarim that he wrote, the Chaim Sha'al, the Yosef Omitz. I could write those too, but when you get to the small ones like Moreh Be'etzba, Sipor and Shamir, those ones I can't." It was tremendous. There, Maran Chida, when he's speaking about Chodesh Elul and so on, he says, the yesod, the fundamental rule of thumb in growth in Yirat Shamayim and Avodat Hashem is you keep the ikar and you add on it. Not to go do crazy humrot and this, and then the main things are lagging and lacking, right? So this is the same thing. The main things everybody does. Kohen Gadol adds on it. Melech adds on that. Adds on the ikar that people do. So says the Gemara, and that's the way Bar Kapara said it. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Nachmani, Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Nachmani said, "Lididi mefar shali mined Rabbi Shua ben Levi." I directly heard this from Rabbi Shua ben Levi, and he said it a little bit different. He said, "Hediot kemo shaman." A regular Yid does the way we said, beginning of Shemona Esrei, beginning of Birkat Avot, end of Birkat Avot, beginning of Modim, afterwards the end of Birkat Hoda'ah. Hatov Shimcha Ulchana Neodot. That's the regular person. Kohen Gadol, he does Techilat Kol Bracha Ubracha, and the Gaon adds here V'sof Kol Bracha Ubracha. So Kohen Gadol does beginning of every bracha and end of every bracha, right? Unlike the first memra that we had, the first girsa that we had, that he only does at the end of every bracha. Here he says, I heard from Rabbi Shua ben Levi that the Kohen Gadol does beginning and end. Now you say, so what is the king going to add now? What's left there to add? Says the Gemara, HaMelech, and the king, Kevan Shikara, once he bows the first time, Shuv Eino Zokef. He stays in a bowing position until the end of Tefillah. The entire Tefillah, he is bowed in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The utmost, ultimate lowering himself, showing that he is just a nothing, right? And where do we learn that from? It has precedent. It says the Gemara, Shenemar, as it says, by Shlomo HaMelech, the most glorious king, the richest, most powerful, the wisest, and so on. When he built the Beit HaMikdash, and the Psukim, already from Perek Hey until Perek Chet, discussed the magnificent thing that he put together, and at the end, he utters the very famous tefillah we have spoken about several times in the shiur of Tfilat Shlomo HaMelech, the entire tefillah, he was bowing on his knees. How do we know? Because the pasuk says at the end, when he finished the tefillah that he uttered, Kam milifnei, it says, Vayhi kechalot Shlomo leitpalel, when he finished davening, Kam milifnei mizbeach Hashem mikaroa al birkav. Then he got up from in front of the mizbeach of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, mikaroa al birkav, from bowing on his knees.
How do we know that?
So in other words, the entire time that he was davening, he was on his knees bowing to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, uttering this long tefillah, and then when he finished, he got up. So you see from here that the king, when he davens, he is back. Now we have in halachot of tefillah of Shemona Esrei, when it comes to Yamim Noraim, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, the Tur brings a minhag that some people, the entire tefillah, they would bow. They would be bent the entire tefillah, because you want to show absolute subordination to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in those days. Right? Kol shana sherash b'tchilata mitasheret besofas Gemara in Rosh Hashanah. If you are rash, you're batbach, you're like nothing. In the beginning of the year, you show that you have nothing of your own, and you feel like that genuinely. Then mitasheret besofas. That's a skula for having a good year. So then, halachically, it's debatable if you could do that, or maybe at the end of every bracha, you have to be standing straight, and also in regular places that you have to bow properly. So that's really the halacha, but there is such a minhag, and it comes from here. So says the Gemara, Tam Rabbanan. We have three different ways of bowing, and we had this before. We discussed this already in the previous Masechta. Says the Gemara, Tam Rabbanan, Kida alapayim. Kida is a very difficult one, and it's basically standing up straight, bowing, bending the from your waist face down on the floor. We spoke about this, that you really have to be in shape to do this. And Levi, actually, one of the two reasons that he became lame was because he tried to show how kida is, and he hurt himself, and he got an everlasting damage to his feet. He couldn't walk properly afterwards, right? But again, when I said that this wasn't because of this necessarily, it was a combination of two different things. Says the Gemara, Shenemar, how do we know? But Tikat Batsheva apayim aretz. Batsheva bowed in front of David HaMelech completely to eretz, to his face. Apayim, face, aretz. That your face gets to the ground basically by bowing kida. Now, what is the story? The story is when Adoniyahu announced himself king. There were several sons of David HaMelech that they wanted to be king after him. Of course, Avshalom was the first one that led a massive, organized, orchestrated, methodically thought through revolt against his father. And then he was killed by Yoav and Tzruya, which we spoke about his history before. That everyone knows. But what people don't know is that the full brother of Avshalom, another one of them, was Adoniyahu. Adoniyahu also was a very beautiful, thoughtful personality. And at the very end of David HaMelech's life, when he was already, frail and sick and on bed and so on, he just got the main officials of the government, and he announced himself king, and he made a big party. And he left out all the people who were supporters of Shlomo HaMelech, Ben Yehoyada, and Natan Hanavi, and so on. Natan Hanavi was the one that caught on to this and came to Batsheva, told Batsheva, this means trouble for you. And this is unlike what was promised by HaKadosh Baruch Hu to you, that your son Shlomo is going to be the king. So you have to do something about it. They plan it, they go to David HaMelech. And at the end of the story, when Batsheva speaks to David HaMelech, presenting this case, this is where she bows. She bows to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Of course, we know what happened with Adoniyahu was that Shlomo HaMelech forgave him for having done this. David HaMelech that day, he swears, he says, today I'm going to amend this. And you see the greatness of David HaMelech, even on his deathbed, he did not delay a mitzvah. He said, today I'm going to do it. And immediately he amended the issue, and he officially nominated Shlomo HaMelech as his successor, as the king. and Shlomo HaMelech let go of Adoniyahu. But then afterwards, he felt, Shlomo was a very smart man, he felt that he was planning a revolt against him now by asking for Bathsheba and so on and so forth. So Shlomo HaMelech had him killed, actually. So that's another one of the sons of David HaMelech that was killed because of a attempted revolt against the throne.
The proof for Shlomo HaMelech, it's when he was inaugurating the temple.
That's correct.
So why is that a relevant proof? That's a very special occasion.
That's a good question.
You're inaugurating the Beit HaMikdash. Now you're going to tell me every single.
It's a good question, and that's exactly why there's machloket. What would the king do? But I see that you have precedent for this in the king, and that's how Rabbi Shimon ben Levi said it. That a king, his official davenings is going to be like the official davening that you see by a king, the only official davening that you see in Tanakh by a king on behalf of the tzibur. Of course, you find King Chizkiyahu when he was davening for himself that we had before in the Gemara, right? And he stood by the wall and davened. But this is the official tefillah of the king that you see on behalf of the tzibur, and that has precedent like that. Now, it's a machloket, you're correct. It's not a airtight proof. Otherwise, you wouldn't have a machloket about this, whether or not it's going to be like that. But they found a precedent for this, and that's the Rabbi Shimon Levi in the second member. Says the Gemara, Ishtachavad, so that's kida. Kriya al birkaim. Lichro is when you go on your knees and you bow to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Shenemar, as we say, Michro al birkav. And that's by Shlomo HaMelech, as we just mentioned, that when he ended his tefillah on behalf of Tzibur, he got up from bowing on his knees. So that you see, Kriya is when you knee on the floor and then you bow. So that's Kriya. And Hishtachava is a higher level. So Pishutrat Yadayim V'Raglayim is a person that goes completely face on the ground, flat, with open hands and arms, completely. And again, that's the most vulnerable situation because you can't even move, right? Each one of this is more vulnerable and lower than the other one. You're lowering yourself even more. When you have feet together and you bow, you don't have even proper balance. You're vulnerable. If somebody pushes a person that's bowing, you'll fall. You don't have you're lowering yourself. Kriya is even more. You're going down on your knees. Ishtachava is completely, like you say, I'm dust and dirt. You're completely on the ground, face down. So that's the highest level of bowing. Ishtachava is Pishut Yadayim V'Raglayim Shneimar. As Yaakov Avinu told Yosef, and he had his famous dream of sun and the moon and the 11 Kochavim bowing to him. And when Yaakov Avinu, of course, he believed the Chalom of Yosef, but he didn't want animosity to be brewing between the brothers, so he jumped at him in front of the brothers. Of course, he says, Aviv Shamaret Hadavar, he kept it to see when it's going to happen, but in front of the siblings, he wanted to diffuse the potential jealousy and animosity and hatred. So he said, me, your mother, and your brothers are going to come to bow. That means we're completely going to be on the ground. And that the Gemara says, you see, Ishtachava is face down, complete body, flat on the floor. Says the Gemara. Rav Chia, Rav Huna, the son of Rav Huna, said, Chazina lo l'Abaye v'Rava. I saw Abaye and Rava, the Matzli Atzluya, when they wanted to do Tachanunim. Now, nowadays, when we say Nefilat Apayim, right? Nefilat Apayim, we don't do any, the Sfaradim don't do anything, right? The Ashkenazim, they go on their arm, right? But they don't do the David. We say the Mizmor, but we don't do the Nefilat Apayim. They do the little Nefilat Apayim, but they don't say the Mizmor, they say different Mizmor. The reason being because if you don't have proper Kavanah saying that Mizmor in state of Nefilat Apayim, it's trouble. It's not good. Without getting too much into the details of this. So therefore, everyone changes something. Sfaradim don't change the Mizmor, but they change the Nefilat Apayim. Ashkenazim, they change the Mizmor, but they do the Nefilah somewhat at least. But it used to be that they actually did Nefilat Apayim. They would go on the floor. So says Gemara, I saw, we spoke about this, by the way, when we spoke about the Gemara in Baba Metziah Daf Nun Tet, Amud Aleph, about hurting someone's feelings, and Onaat Devarim, the story of Tanur Achnai, of Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkanus, Rabbi Eliezer Agadol, when he was put in harem by his brother-in-law, by Rabban Gamliel, and Rabbi Yeshua, his chavruta, and the rest of the chachamim, and he was really hurt, even though that they were right. But he was hurt, and his wife, who was the sister of Rabban Gamliel, would make sure that he doesn't say Nefillat Apayim every day, because the power of Nefillat Apayim is tremendous. And she felt that if he gets to do a proper Nefillat Apayim one day, Hashem is going to kill her brother, because he publicly caused him pain, even though that he was due pain. And that's exactly what happened. One day that she missed, and he said Nefillat Apayim, that's the day that Rabban Gamliel passed away. So that's what we spoke about, both of this, both the power of Nefillat Apayim and the fact that they actually used to go flat on the floor. So says the Gemara, he saw Abaye and Rava, that when they would do Nefillat Apayim, they wouldn't go hishtachavav straight, they would go on their side. And what is the reason for that? Because there is a problem, halachic problem of going, bowing on even maskit, on a stone floor, right? So nowadays we deal with this much less, because we don't have necessarily some Batei Midrash actually have this, and those Batei Midrash who have stone, actual granite and so on the floor for Yom Kippurim, it becomes more of a question. They can't just do on the floor when they go by Avodat Yom Kippurim, by Musaf of Yom Kippur. They have to have something in between them, and so on and so forth. But nevertheless, on a stone floor, it becomes more of a question, and therefore here says that Abaya and Rava, they would be matzli atzluya, they would go on their sides. Rashi says in the last wide line up there, when they would do Nefillat Apayim and poshtin yedehem v'raglehem, they would not go completely spreading their body on the floor, and a matin al sideh, they would go on their side to remedy this issue. Says the Gemara, Tarikh Adam, we learned hakorea behoda'a tareze meshubach. When you do kriya, when you bow in hoda'a, in the bracha modim, tareze meshubach is great. Gavaldik. But Tanya Idach, a different Braita says, Hareze Megune, it's ugly. So diametrically opposed Braitas. Is it nice to bow by Modim, or is it ugly to bow by Modim? Give me one direction. This is like, you can't do both. Says the Gemara, no kash, it's not a problem. It's not a stira. Ha-betchilam, ha-lebasof. One of them is in the beginning. In the beginning, you bow, but at the end, you don't. Right? Says the Gemara, Rava kara behoda'at tchila b'sof. You think you could remedy this by saying the beginning you do, in the end you don't do? Rava did by both. He bowed in the beginning and he bowed at the end. Says the Gemara, Amni Rabbanan told him, Rava was the Rosh Yeshiva. They told him, Hacham, the two brightest over here, what do you do? Right? Amayka avid morhachi. Why are you doing like that? Well, you're missing the second braita. This is the second wide line we are. Amalehu said, no, I have Maaser Rav. You think I pulled this out of my pocket? I've been around. I've seen so many Gedolei Hador that they did this. So I'm doing a precedented thing that I saw from the great Talmidei Hamim and Gedolei Hador of the previous generation. It says, Chazina, L'Rav Nachman de Kara, V'chazina L'Rav Sheshat de Ka'avid Hachi. So I saw the Gedolei Hador do this, and therefore I do it as well. Now, this is important. We had in the Gemara prior to this in Daf Zayin that Shimush Talmidei Hamim is gadol, is even greater than limudat and learning Torah. Sticking around Talmidei Hamim and seeing how they live sometimes is more important, because you learn things that you can't even learn, and therefore the Gemara sometimes says Maaser Rav. You see, if, a Talmidei Chacham did some way, and that you learn a lot of halachot from just the conduct of a Talmidei Chacham, right? So sometimes people think, by someone who hasn't been in yeshiva, hasn't been around the Gedolei Hador and great Talmidei Hamim, and has just read a lot of Sfarim and is very intellectually capable. Sometimes they start doing things that it's not acceptable to the mind of a person or the community, and that's because of this. I remember once when I was a very young boy, I read in the Cheshek Shlomo's Tshuvot, is sefer, a tremendous sefer of Tshuvot, Rav Shlomo Mivilna, Shlomo HaKohen Mivilna. He is the Cheshek Shlomo at the back of the Gemara, one of the Gedolei Achronim, and he has a fantastic sefer of Tshuvot called Binyan Shlomo. So Binyan Shlomo has a tshuva about Tkiyat Shofar on Rosh Hashanah, and he makes it very difficult. As I was learning, the first time I was learning the Sugya of Tkiyat Shofar, the Iyun, I always tell people that you have to choose on Rosh Hashanah a shul that the Baal Tokea really knows what he's doing. It's a really, really difficult thing to do. It's not that every person that could sound the horn could blow shofar. It's not at all like that. So Binyan Shlomo brings from the Rashba, the Ran, four Gedolei Arishonim, that the shiur of Tkiyah and Teruah has to be exactly the same. Not just in principle has to be the same, the minimum of the shiur, and you could do it as long as you want. But if you blow a 6 second or 7, 8 second Tkiyah, then your Teruah has to be exactly 7 or 8 seconds, exactly matching that set's Tkiyah. It's a very difficult thing to do. Very difficult. And 90% of or more of the Baalei Tkiyah don't do that. So that was, of course, very scary for me. And you're talking about like machloket of Gedolei Arishonim, the way he learns it is like almost an equal 4 on this side, 4 on that side, and the names of the Rishonim are major Rishonim. Talking about the Rashba, talking about the Ran. So I went on a research to find why and I found that Rav Moshe Sternbach actually brings this in Moadim Uzmani. So I was like, oh, okay, so there is something serious to talk about. So I went to somebody that I respect a lot, one of the great poskim in East Coast, and I asked him, I said, why is it that this is not the minhag? I found Rav Shlomo Mivilna says it. I found that Rav Moshe Sternbach, the head of the Haredit, he brings this in Moadim Uzmanim. And he tells me, he says, Shlomo, look, I was every Rosh Hashanah, I davened in the minyan of Rav Moshe Sternbach himself. And he himself, in his Bet Midrash, is not makpid on this. Even though that he writes this chumrah in his sefer, practically speaking, he is not makpid on this. So come down from the high horse, basically. It's not the minhag. It's not the minhag, don't do it, right? And that's, I accept it, and that's it. So, even though that you have, the great thing of having a Rav, having a Gadol Ador, having a More Derech, a More Hora'ah, for individuals, for families, for children, for Baalei Batim, and even for Talmidei Hamim, the Gemara says, and until the day that Shlomo Melech had a Rebbe, his Rebbe Shmi ben Gera was alive, even though that he was many folds greater than his Rebbe, but he didn't sin to go marry the daughter of Paro. So that is a healthy thing. And again, here, Rava, I just went on a tangent here, but Rava says, you bring me a braita, I saw it from the Gedolei Ador. Zeu. And therefore, whatever the teretz is, the Gemara is going to deal with this right now, with what the teretz is going to be, but that is what I do, says Rava. Yes. It's correct. So now you're bringing 2 braitas that maybe you do only in the beginning, you do only in the end. So now we're dealing with that, right? So it says. Very good. Says the Gemara. Let's just finish this now. Says the Gemara. Right? Says I saw the Gedolim did this. So with the Braita says Hakorea beoda'a hareze megune. It's not right. Says the Gemara, Hahi behoda'a shebehalel. Says Rava, you learned wrong pshat. That's not talking about the hoda'a of modim. It's talking about hoda'a of halel, which is hodu l'Adonai kitov kilo l'am chasno. That's called hoda'a also, but it's a hoda'a of halel. And to bring it a full circle, the Gemara is saying this because we learned in the beginning that hediot, a regular person is supposed to do in the beginning and the end of Hoda'ah, and you may have a contrast that this Braita with that Braita and say, wait a second, this other Braita says that's Megune if you do bowing at the end of Hoda'ah, therefore the Gemara brings it in this way and says, no, that is a misunderstanding. It's talking about Halil. That's a checkmate. Says you can't say that the Hoda'ah means Hoda'ah of Halil because there's another Braita, a third one or a fourth one, that says anyone that bows in Hoda'ah and in Hoda'ah of Halil is Meguneh. So Hoda'ah of Halil is already said explicitly. And yet there's another Hoda'ah. So it must be the Hoda'ah of Modim, Shemona Esrei, which means, but Lebasof at least, which is the Bracha Atov Shimcha U'Chal Ha'Erodot, says the Gemara. No. Kitanya Hai beHoda'ah de Birkat HaMazon. That is talking about the Hoda'ah of Birkat HaMazon, and Hoda'ah of Shemona Esrei is not even a part of that. In other words, in a place that you're not supposed to be bowing, it's not instituted to be bowing. You're not supposed to be bowing. It becomes a whole machloket whether or not the person should bow by Alenu L'Shabeach. Alenu L'Shabeach. We say Barach Mishtachavim Umudim, but it's not one of the places that Chazal instituted to be bowing, right? Or for Brich Shmeh. They would say we bow in front of your Sefer Torah. Many people go down, right? Bowing. So is that mutar? Is that not mutar? Maybe a person should not completely bow, which constitutes bowing your body, your back, and your head. Maybe you should just move a little bit yourself, not a full bowing, in order to show a subordination, but also not bow. So that becomes a very fascinating discussion that Chacham Obadia and his son, they have writings on this. Bezrat Hashem, we'll discuss this in the days to come.
So at the end, we said.
Rabotai, I want to ask again, we have everyone here.